Hello, this is Hugo Prévost, and you are listening to SVGA, a PC retro gaming podcast. Here we go. With me, as always, Robert Hiltz. Hello, Robert.
Hello, Hugo. Nice to
How
be
are
back.
you?
Been a while.
It's been a while. It's been our last episode was in October, I think.
Hiatus.
And that was the interview with the developer behind the Dwarf strategy game.
That's right.
Our last one with you and I, oh boy. I think it was Tiny Combat Arena, which was back in May. So that's
we've been
almost a year. But yeah, glad to be back with you. Glad to be able to. I think we've mentioned this before, but it's always a bit complicated to find a time to talk to each other. So yeah, that's. I'm happy to be able to do that today.
Oh, me too. It's nice to be back, and hoping that we can keep this up for a while longer.
Yeah, I hope so too. I mean, it's. We understand we all have jobs and much stuff to do, but yeah, it's always nice to find the time to talk about old games. And today it's an oldie and a goodie. I think that's the way the expression goes.
It is like we're playing something that's not garbage, which is a nice return. Nice way to come back.
Exactly. And so what are we talking about today, Robert?
We are talking about StarCraft, although I think we'll be talking StarCraft Remastered, but we're going to talk StarCraft just as a...
Yeah, StarCraft, the one of the best known, if not the best known real-time strategy game out there. Don't want to maybe insult Command & Conquer fans or WarCraft fans, but I believe that StarCraft is, especially with StarCraft II that came out now a few years ago. But yeah, the StarCraft game in 1998 was the one of the cornerstones of Blizzard Entertainment, which is still known today, of course, for, once again, StarCraft II, but also World of Warcraft and Diablo, the Diablo series, of course. Which we talked about
way
over a
back.
year ago.
Yeah.
And so, StarCraft is a military real-time strategy game. I mean, when you talk about real-time strategy, usually it's military stuff, which goes into during the, I think, 25th century, something like that.
I think it starts in like 2466 or 99. They picked one of those numbers, I think.
Yeah. And so you have three races, the humans, the Zerg, and the Protoss, who battles to the death over a dozen or so planets in the Koprulu sector. And I've always asked myself if Koprulu was a reference to Starship Troopers.
Oh.
I haven't checked this, but I mean, it sounds like something from Starship Troopers.
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. We may as well start off talking about it with like the intro movie, which I had kind of forgotten about, but like... really, really solid intro. Does a lot of really excellent world building right up front. Like, oh, these alien things are kind of scary. It's got that whole Apocalypse Now reference with the guy that's rocking back and forth after he shoots the grenades. Like,
I believe, but now you're talking about the expansion intro because because StarCraft has an expansion which is called Brood War. When you buy Star Wars, wow, that's what a slip of the tongue. But yeah, when you play StarCraft, the original intro was two guys on a small spaceship outside of a Terran colony, and then the Protoss ship comes up over them, and there's sort of a beam which basically destroys the human ship. And but yeah, the Brood War intro was...
I forgot that there were two different intros, and because it's remastered, I don't think it even said Brood War at the end. It just it cut. Okay,
yeah.
Well,
but yeah, the Brood War intro was a reference to Apocalypse Now, and it's a war movie, and then there's aliens coming from everywhere, and it's really some kind of I want to say human wave, but it's an insectoid wave. So it's all the Zerg units are coming, and then the human soldiers are completely overwhelmed. and that sets the tone for for Brood War.
And I think the videos do even sort of some of the ones through the campaign. Like there's the one where there's two guys in like a pickup truck driving, and they were like, "Oh, I think you hit that man's dog." That's no dog, Jimmy. And then they just get murked by some Zerg. Like they do a lot of really interesting there's more to this than just like Marines and whatever. Like there is kind of a world that this is happening in a way that you can't really show in a real-time strategy game, especially in the late 90s. But it really sets up that like, oh yeah, like, okay, this is about more than just like the grunts coming out of the barracks and all your build orders and stuff like that. There is more to this world, even if we only get kind of glimpses of it.
Yeah, and that's, I think, one of the main point of interest with StarCraft. I mean, there's the gameplay, of course, the strategies, but when you talk about the world building, you have these cinematics that weren't really there a few years before. I'm thinking really quick in my head about Command and Conquer and Red Alert, where you had these small movies, but it was completely kitsch and camp, and with your favorite style of stuff integrated into video game. I'm talking about, of course, full motion video.
A favorite of this podcast.
Absolutely. But yeah, when you move to StarCraft, it's okay. The animation is a bit older now, it shows, but it's done in a way that even if there is some bit of campiness with the sort of space rednecks, there is really something more interesting, and it's done in a better way than just showing someone playing Stalin or whatever. And so, like you said, there's these glimpses in a world where we don't live, but it's basically Earth, but in space, but not really, and with some strange alien stuff mixed in.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that sort of the Confederacy is led by or the admiral you deal with, at least early in the game. He's he's got that Louisiana drawl where he's like, I don't know. I think it's interesting that they made those specific choices, that your sort of enemy is this Confederacy, and they're Southern.
Yeah, and it's called the Confederacy.
It's an interesting choice, and I think it works well to set them up as like, oh, okay, villains, got it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And it's also one of the interesting points of the game when you start with the Terran campaign in StarCraft. You basically play as Jim Raynor, which was until the game starts a marshal in the faraway colony.
Real cowboy stuff.
You're like the I don't want to say laid back, but you're sort of that disillusioned guy, and eventually you'll get more and more importance into that rebellious faction, which will end up taking power in that part of space, and which becomes the Confederacy. And so I think, maybe I'm mistaken, but I think that's how it works. And anyway, eventually you'll realize that, well, these guys are, like you said, are bad, and so you'll escape, and then this will end up being discussed again in StarCraft II, and so on and so on. But yeah, so you play as sort of a main character, but not really, because you can control him too, but you must protect him, because if he dies, well, the mission's over. And so I think, once again, it's how you can make this really, really interesting, because if I'm correct, in 1997 is the year that Total Annihilation came out.
Okay.
And we talked about it on another episode, and I think I said at the time, we referenced StarCraft, and I said, there's no story really in Total Annihilation. There's no characters. They're all robots. They don't talk. They don't have emotions. There's no betrayal. And even if the gameplay is mostly the same. I mean, you gather resources, you build a base, you create units, and then you attack. In StarCraft, it's a space drama, basically.
Yeah, and I think parts of that work really well, but it also kind of shows the limitations of a real-time strategy. Like talking about Jim Raynor, and, playing as him, there's only so much you can do. Like, okay, he's got all his upgrades and stuff from the regular vultures or whatever that unit is. And he does talk to you and so on, but it's, you're controlling him from above. He can't really do anything that exceptional compared to normal units. And I don't think they really, I think the storytelling really works, like without a doubt. But the mechanics sort of leave a bit to be desired in a way that I think they solve by WarCraft III when they get into that new engine where the heroes are like distinct characters and they can do a lot more with that. I mean, it obviously works so well that they sort of abandoned the WarCraft as a real-time strategy and turned that into just like the RPG part. Like the success of World of Warcraft, I think, like really shows which kind of thread in a real-time strategy, like if you're going to follow two of these things, once you master that sort of, essentially role-playing part, like, well, why do we have all this other stuff?
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think you're right in that when you compare it to Total Annihilation, the gameplay fairly similar and so on, but that campaign holds together a lot better and is a lot more interesting just because you do get those characters and you get their voices, and they are well acted.
Absolutely, yes.
And I don't know how much of that is just in the remastered, because I know it's said that some stuff was redone, but a lot of these phrases and stuff, I'm like, oh, this is a really familiar voice. Like I'd forgotten about him. And it's well done, which goes a long way in a video game. Like poorly done voice work, really, you feel that.
But I believe, I mean, my I don't have the right English word in my head right now, but what I can remember from the original game, I mean, at the time, I was a lot younger, but I believe that it worked really well. And we've talked about the cinematics. We've talked about a bit about the main characters. You have a Terran one. You have a Zerg one, which was, spoiler alert, formerly human. And she'll come back in StarCraft II and so on. But yeah, during the gameplay, when you do the missions, there are also, it's not only between the missions that you get those cinematics and those talking moments. It's really during the mission, there's something in the scenario will trigger an exchange, a dialogue between characters. And then it's like a bit of a movie, but with gameplay elements between these parts. But you're never taken completely outside the game. You're still at the game, on the game screen. You still have the map and the interface, but usually you cannot control anything. You cannot. Yeah. So it's basically scripted. But I think it's not too scripted.
No, it never feels like you're sort of being taken over. They never felt too long or too drawn out or, take too much out of it. It's not like a good example is like a first-person shooter cutscene where it's like maybe mash a couple buttons kind of thing. It never feels like you're being drawn out in that same way. It flows pretty well.
And talking about flow, funnily enough, that same year, 1998, was the year that Half-Life came out.
Yeah, I mean, big year.
Yeah, a huge year for the video game industry. And we've talked about it in our very first episode where we said that it was revolutionary at the time, that it doesn't take you out of the game. You can still move, you can still act, well, on a minimal level, but you can still do stuff while people talk. And so you can miss stuff too. I mean, this doesn't happen in StarCraft because basically you are all seeing being, but it's really a good way to present a story.
Yeah.
Instead of, like you said, in the first-person shooter in Call of Duty, for example, or whatever other game of that kind, where everything is scripted. You cannot move really. You cannot, and there are shooting sequences, but otherwise it's something is blowing up. You have to look, or you have to you're stuck in place while this stuff happens.
Yeah, no, I think that's right, and I think one of the I mean, we can't talk about StarCraft without talking about multiplayer. And I think one of the things that around this time really starts to happen is internet gameplay becomes a lot more stable. Like I can remember trying to play Duke Nukem 3D online, which only would have been a few years before this. And it was possible, but you'd have to use like heat.net or some of these other things. And, connections were kind of spotty, would go in and out. Like maybe you knew someone who ran a Quake server or something, but it was never, you could never really do the kind of matchmaking thing really stably. At least in my recollection, like it never, but with this and with Half-Life in different ways, but Battle.net in particular, like you could play with your friends if you knew them, or you could just play with random people in like, hey, I'm going to do this map, playing this stuff. And it just worked. Almost all of the time. I mean, I'm sure there were hiccups, but I don't have major recollections of like not being able to do stuff. It worked in a way that they'd figured out that, if it wasn't the first game, it was like really early on to figuring out how to make this stuff really sing.
Yeah. And I believe they did of course, with Blizzard, it's called, that platform is Battle.net, which is still alive today. And it's basically now the name of the launcher. If you try to play a Blizzard game, it's going to launch a program called Battle.net. So it's still there. And then, like you said, I'm pretty sure it was already there for Diablo 1 in 1995, maybe, something like that. But for me, it was really StarCraft in 1998. You could just log in, create an account, and then find some random people, play with your friends. And it was a world better than just a few years prior when I tried to play Red Alert with a friend online. We needed to connect via modem instead of going through an internet portal. And each one of us had to put the CD into the CD drive. So we were lucky that was a game with 2 CDs. So you have to, one of us had the first one and the other had the second. And then we connected via modem directly and so on. And now this would be completely, I mean, not impossible to do, but so foreign, so alien that, sorry.
No, it's fine. I mean, it was right there. You had to do it.
But yeah, so if you ask me I mean, if we ever do an episode on Heroes of Might and Magic 3, for example, and we try to do a multiplayer game of that, I mean, basically it's almost impossible to do because unless we do something like play by mail or whatever. But yeah, so at that time you had about 4, 5, 6 different options. And then now today, you play via the internet. There's no other way to do that.
Yeah. And I think this was like one of the first big steps of moving towards that, of something like integral to the game itself that just kind of works.
I want to ask you about, because I don't think we can talk about StarCraft without talking about the music. Was it a sort of a big nostalgia moment when the music started to play?
It was a series of songs that I'd forgotten existed. Like I would never have, gone seeking them out on Spotify or anything. But as soon as I started to hear it, like it really like opened up a portal to, God, more than 20 years ago now. Yeah. And they're good. Like they're like, oh, this is good. And I think they have remastered the songs.
Yeah, I think so too.
But they sound great, and like that music slaps.
Yeah, it does. And I went out and seek the song. I mean, basically mostly the Terran songs in StarCraft 1.
Yeah.
Which are named, it's quite original, Terran 1 and 3, and I think there's 2 in there somewhere, I believe. I mean, there's a 1 and a third. I mean, there's basically a second one. But yeah, so Terran 1 and 3, it's still really good. But like you said, it opens up a portal where it's like you're back there. You're collecting resources. You're training Marines.
Yeah.
You're trying to build siege tanks and battle cruisers and so on and so on. And it's a great music to work on. I mean,
it is.
It's a great background music in a sense.
At one point, I actually had to pause while I was writing something else, and it just I just left the music playing. Like, okay, like.
I believe Terran 1 was one of my most listened to songs in 2021 or something
really?
like that.
That's interesting.
Yeah. I mean, each year we share our own top, I think it's 100 on Spotify.
Something like that, yeah.
Amongst each other, amongst ourselves. And usually it's followed by, I don't know any of these artists or any of these bands. But yeah, so you listen to a lot of... what's your band already? I mean, they do the Sultan of Swing song.
Yeah, I went through a real long period of where I listened to Dire Straits every day for exactly. 6 months. Haven't listened to that one in a while. I go in and out of these real deep phases. But StarCraft. Your multiplayer experience. What, like, did you play with friends you knew exclusively? Like, did you end up playing with lots of people online? Like, I know this time we didn't play much in the way of multiplayer, but I think classically. Ooh.
No, but because I believe we are both, we both prefer games where you can build up.
Yeah.
And that's one of the points that I want to ask you about in a few minutes. But I'm sure I'm going to get my ass kicked if I do this now, if I try. Because the people that are playing now, it's like getting to a shooter 5 years after it came out. The people that are still there have mastered everything, and you'll get killed in about a fraction of a second. And but yeah, at the time I played mostly with strangers, I think.
Okay. Yeah,
and it was finding people that which had a rank. I think there's still a ranking system, but yeah, had a fairly low rank because I'm not that good at that game. And then just trying to have fun and basically playing on my old computer in my old house on via modem, of course.
Of course.
And so you had to cross your fingers that your parents didn't need to call someone, or because then you had to disconnect.
I think at this point we got a cable modem pretty early.
Oh, that's cool.
So I think because I remember I'd still take up the phone line because I'd call one of my friends and we just talk to each other on the phone while we played. And we do a lot of 2-on-2 stuff or whatever. And like, that could be fun. Also really not fun when you like cross paths with someone else who's doing like a 2v2. But yeah, so like it did a lot of that sort of thing, but it was funny playing the single player. And I had the same thought as you did, like, oh, I'm just going to get crushed if I try and do this online. Cause like, I do not have any of the hotkeys down anymore. Yeah. I never really loved like super fast build orders, like other than getting, your early start, starting your resources and stuff. Like I didn't have like a pattern I did every single time where that gets sort of beaten into you. And I think that's kind of, and I think this is the thing you want to talk about, is like, that is now, I think, in one ways, the weaknesses of this game, because the multiplayer sort of funnels you into like very specific ways of playing.
Yeah.
That at a certain point, it's not really strategy in any sense. It's you're baking a cake.
Yeah. And I watched a video, I think 1 or 2 days ago, was a grand StarCraft II master player. And he was playing against 7 ultra hard AIs.
Oh, yeah.
And just watching the guy move his mouse cursor over the screen, and it's all these it's called APMs, I think, actions per minute or something like that,
right.
or CPM clicks per minute or whatever. And it was always clicking everywhere, moving around, selecting stuff, deselecting, just to keep I'm doing gestures with my hands, but nobody can see them besides you. And I was thinking, it's insane. If I practice every day for 6 months, maybe, but where's the fun in that? And so I think the don't want to say failures, but because I still think StarCraft is a fantastic game.
Yeah.
But having played a bunch of missions, about a dozen missions or so in the original game, and we did what I can remember is that basically there's a multiplayer scene where it's basically by the book, and there is a way how every unit has a counter in StarCraft. And that's the way to do it if you want to have a fantastic multiplayer scene, which is StarCraft still has. And of course, there's StarCraft II. There has been tournaments and whatever. But I'm not an esport guy. So that's, if you want to have some kind of esports scene, you basically, I believe, have to work like this. There is a kind of an esports scene for Hearts of Iron 4, for example, but it's really not the same thing. I mean, a match won't last 15 minutes. It will last 4 hours.
Yeah.
And so there's that. And so when I was playing the humans, for example, the human faction, comes to, I think, one of the last missions of the campaign in StarCraft, which is by design quite long and quite hard. And I was thinking, I'm just going to build the most powerful unit available, the battlecruiser, just go through the enemy units and destroy everything. But no, I had to inch along and then wait as my repair unit was coming back to do some repairs and then move forward and so on. It's not fun, really. It's not really that fun.
No, and it's yeah, and I think that's sort of where I think at the time it was a great game, but it's not one that I'm going to like get myself fully back up to speed with and jump into the multiplayer scene or anything like that, because it's just at a certain point that style of play is like, oh, this is kind of boring. Like this isn't like, it's not testing me in a strategic sense. It's testing me in like, how fast can I click? How much have I memorized of a certain pattern and that kind of thing. Which is, I mean, it's, a 24-year-old game. At a certain point, like things get refined to that like very sharp point. But, for it, as playing the single player and kind of reliving all the cool things about it, like I really, really like the backgrounds and stuff. And I don't know if they were this detailed in the original. I honestly can't remember, but seeing little storefronts with actual names on them, with like, you can see like they're got little marine suits and there's a little banner above, like, I got mine at Jody's or whatever it is. Like that stuff's cool. And like seeing the little solar things that spin around, like, okay, like there's something more to this place that's kind of cool.
Absolutely.
But when it comes to like getting all my hotkeys and like building the perfect army in the minimum amount of time, I can focus doing other things.
And one of the things that I was a bit disappointed with, because it was not a remake per se, it was a remaster. And maybe the line is a bit murky sometimes between the two, but they basically kept all the old control mechanics, all the old building placement mechanics. And so it's still as easy as before to get, for example, construction units stuck behind a supply depot, for example. Or if you try to assign a place to gather all your units when they are produced, in the barracks, for example, when you click on the barrack, yes, it's going to flash for a half a second where you set up your rallying point. But since, in the now 25 years because it's 2023. Oh my God. And, but you could have a small flag or whatever to tell you they are going there.
Or some kind of overlay with just,
Yeah. And so, or a way to see what orders did I give to my units, or not necessarily to complicate things so much, but just to facilitate the existence of the player for, if you know what I mean.
A bit of sort of just ease of use, or there's another term for it, but just to make life a little easier and better on the player rather than, no, I think that's right. And, it wasn't a super expensive game. It's only, I think I paid $19 for it.
Yeah.
Which isn't bad, but, they could have given me a bit more.
Yeah, I believe so too. And I've discovered that they removed the map editor in the game.
Oh, interesting.
Because at the time you could build all these crazy scenarios with, like you said, you could put down these solar things that were spinning, or construct your world basically with all these types of terrains, and create some time triggers in the game and so on. I once tried to recreate the June 6th assault on Normandy in the game. It never worked, but there were all these bunch of units, and one side had all these transport dropships with the Marines,
right?
And then the other side had all these missile defense turrets and bunkers, and so you had allies versus
that's interesting,
German army and so on, and that was fun to do. That was a way to explore and create, and I believe that's one of the first places where players created some stuff like tower defense.
Yeah, I remember playing like RPG levels in multiplayer and that sort of thing, where you'd have particular goals and you only had one person, and like they'd be upgraded through, completing things through a mission, which I think is one of those things that in a lot of other games, especially of this age, that they really support that kind of the modding community or the mission community, because that's the kind of thing that you don't really have to do anything with the game. You just make sure that the back end runs, and then people find wild ways to play things.
I mean, they kept it for WarCraft III, and then this gave us, and the one, maybe I'm wrong, but I think this gave us League of Legends.
Oh, interesting.
Or something like that. And they, of course, now it's in StarCraft II since the launch. So I think 10 years ago now, something like that. We are all getting old, Robert.
I never played StarCraft II, which is interesting. Just to give you an idea of how I sort of grew out of the real-time strategy as a thing. Like it's
fine. I think for me, the problem was that you had to buy it in installments.
Right.
So it just came out with the Terran campaign, then you had to buy the Zerg one and then the Protoss one. And it ends up, I mean, now it's discounted, but at the time it was like $40 a piece. But from the get-go, you had the support for custom maps and so on and so on. So, I mean, it's a way to create that kind of buzz, that kind of community with the game. But it's Blizzard, they want money, so it's I mean, like every company does, but Blizzard is a special kind of
that's definitely true.
And we won't talk about Activision because that's another topic for another time.
we can dig into that at some other point.
Would you recommend, I mean, we said that multiplayer thing is not really our thing now, but would you still recommend StarCraft for maybe someone who hasn't played it?
I mean, if you're listening to this podcast and you haven't played StarCraft, like, I don't understand how those two things intersect. Like, I don't understand how you could be interested in old video games and be like, I've never played StarCraft. So if you haven't, absolutely. It's really, like, it's a lot of fun. The campaign is interesting. It does have its limits, but it's well done. Like, I really dig it. I would absolutely. And, if you have friends or whatever that also play StarCraft, like I think multiplayer could be a lot of fun that way. I haven't dipped my toe into it, but I think there are, as long as you're not playing with, a sleeper, super, StarCraft person, you should be fine.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say, it's hard to give a personal opinion without that opinion being tainted by nostalgia. Because at the end of the 90s and this beginning of the 2000s, this was the strategy game that you had to play. I mean, before WarCraft III came out, for example, but even then, WarCraft III was more, for me, it was more limited in its scope.
Yeah, that was more of a focused sort of, it really wanted to be the RPG that World of Warcraft became. It just, they didn't quite, they hadn't made that choice yet, but it's not a strategy game in that sense.
Yeah, but StarCraft, you could have, I mean, not necessarily 1,000 units on the screen, but you could have waves of Zergs, for example, and human ships firing into them. There could be explosions everywhere. It was really a galactic war, and a good way to pay homage, in a sense, to Warhammer 40K, which is mostly based on, I mean, Space Marines, aliens.
Yeah.
So it's mostly, Space Marines and the, what's the name of the, anyway, there's one race in Warhammer 40K, which is, basically this progression for the Zergs, which are completely always multiplying and just moving across the galaxy and devouring worlds in their way. And they take the genetic information from the victims, and then they evolve to be tougher and meaner and so on as well. So I mean, I think I would still recommend StarCraft. Like you said, if you've never played it before, maybe you are a young person listening right now. Maybe you are an older person who lived under a rock, or just decided now that you want to get into older PC games. That's all right for us. It's a bit surprising, but I mean,
whatever brought you here, that's fine. I don't want to judge. Yeah. I'm just a little curious how that happens.
Yeah. But yeah, it's still a very good game, like you said, for the single player part at least. And otherwise, I mean, it's StarCraft. I mean, it's I think it's in the gaming world, it's one of the pillars of the real-time strategy genre. I mean, there's Red Alert for me, and then what else? I mean, the one of the Total Annihilation, and maybe not even that. Maybe I'm not sure.
I mean, it's one of the only ones still around. Like there's Company of Heroes, which
but it's not exactly. This is more. I mean, StarCraft was already about micromanagement, but Company of Heroes has pushed that to the limit. But yeah, in the sense of the great battle, great fight, great war, I think it's still the only one, the only main one still around. I don't know what this tells us about the game, the RTS scene, but
I think what it shows is that it is an interesting sort of play style, but there are sort of hard limits on it, because while it is like a big galactic war, it also, there are scale limits and you have to control units. The AI management of your own units is okay, but you do have to, you get stuck on like stairwells and stuff. So I think that's why you see something more like Paradox being more the strategy kind of thing, where they can, that sort of grander strategy where you're not necessarily micromanaging individual Marines, but like looking at the whole scope of things, I think is sort of where strategy has gone, because then it does get to be more about strategy than this kind of, because it does eventually, to get the most out of your units and so forth, you do have to, start doing build order optimization and all that kind of stuff. And then you're like, then it's like, well, maybe I should hire a consultant to like manage my thing. And
yeah, and you end up telling yourself that you don't need a bunch of units because you always do the same build order. Then why will you take the opportunity to explore these kind of resources because you don't need them necessarily? And then it's always a bit you don't get that time where, like you said, you can explore your surroundings, you can discover that there's some storefronts there, and then here it's a alien world, so there's weird creatures, and when you click on them enough times they'll blow up or something.
Yeah.
And so it's a bit weird to talk about this 25 years later, because we saw that, I don't want to say that it killed the genre, but a bit.
I mean, yeah, I think the genre was sort of it was just sort of, this is what computers could do at the time, so this is what we're going to do with them. And now, things have moved beyond that. Studios are bigger, can do different things. You can handle a lot more processing of like what AI units are doing off screen and all that kind of stuff. I think it's just, and players have, they hit their limit of, okay, like if you really like StarCraft, you're into that stuff, like you're already into it. You're going to keep grinding away. And if you're not, I think it's going to be a lot like you and I, that, we enjoy the game. We have fond memories of it, but like, I don't know if in, 6 months I'll be, putting in 2 or 3 hours a week kind of thing. Like I think I am actually going to finish some of the campaigns because like, okay, this is pretty fun, but that will probably be where things stop for me.
And for me too, I think, because, well, for one part that we do have to work.
Yes.
And there's always new games coming out, and we try to, I do have to review new games for PS.ca, so which is good in a sense and bad in another sense. But today, I believe that you and I maybe moved on to, once again, grand strategy, be it Hoi4 or I'm getting into Total War lately. So
interesting. Yeah,
the one with the Warhammer universe.
I've the one I've sunk a lot of time to in that one is the Napoleon one. Yeah. But I think actually Total War, just to kind of round out the thought, really kind of gets the balance well. Yeah. In that you have that sort of grand strategy where you're, upgrading towns and that sort of thing and putting together armies, but then you get to do that sort of that management of the actual battles when they happen on a way that makes more sense in like a micromanaging way rather than all on the same interface. Like having two separate interfaces, I think makes a big difference. And I think I think Total War has in many ways figured out the real-time strategy balance, because I don't find it too onerous of something like Hoi4 where you're just like bombarded with all kinds of decisions and metrics and so much, which we've sort of touched on occasionally. But it also doesn't oversimplify things, because you still have the sort of diplomacy and that kind of aspect of it, but you still get to sort of manage a battle in real time in a way that I think is really cool.
I think I maybe mentioned it before, but my dream game, and I think we'll close the episode on this, but my dream game will be something in a space theme. So you'll take, I'll take maybe the Warhammer 40k world, because I've played a lot of Dawn of War, the first one, and that thing's awesome. But yeah, there won't be anything like this, I think, ever again. I mean, for now, it's been a really long while. The studio have closed and so on. And so you will take this universe, which is basically StarCraft on steroids, and you put this into the Total War way of doing things. So you have your planets with your production, and then you have your space battles, and then you have your land battles with your space marines and your Necrons and whatever. And that would be a game that would take 1,000 hours to do a campaign, but it could be completely crazy. But I don't think it will sell that many copies, or maybe a bit too niche somehow.
Maybe. I mean, there's a way. I think it's like everything else. It's finding the balance between doing too much and not doing enough. And at the time, I think StarCraft had that balance perfectly. But 20, 25 years later, it maybe not as much. Maybe it's a little too simple.
Yeah, well, you get. I mean, that's why. Like I told you before we started recording, that's why I stopped for now. Something like a midpoint in the Zerg campaign for the first game is that it's basically you build, you attack, you defend. Sometimes you have to wait. Sometimes you have to survive 30 minutes before the evac drop ships come in. When I've played the StarCraft II human campaign for the first time, and I got to that point where you had the evacuation mission, I was like, we already did this in the first game. Can we do something else, please?
And I think the answer to that question is no, because this is what it is.
Yeah. But I mean, basically, that's always the limits of a game. I mean, you cannot take Horror 4, for example, or whatever other game and do something completely different.
Yeah. We've ended on a kind of negative note here for a game that's actually pretty good, but
it is pretty good, but there are limitations to it.
And I guess that's kind of the weird part of looking back on things like that. But yeah, so I mean, overall, I would still recommend it. But
yes, me too. Yes, and I mean the remastered edition is the graphics are nicer, I think.
Yeah, it's clean, it's smooth, it runs well. If you've got
exactly. And I think for $20, especially if you never played StarCraft, or if you've played it 20 years ago and you want to give it another shot, it's way better way to do it than finding the old installation files and hoping it works on the newest version of Windows or Mac OS, which is basically which it basically won't. I mean, it's always a gamble then. So
yeah, it looks nice. It runs well. It sounds great. The remastered is, if you're thinking about it, it's $20. So it's not like a $90 investment or anything. It's decent.
Yeah. Thank you, Robert, for taking the time to play StarCraft and talk about it with me.
Hey, always happy to do it.
And I hope we can meet again soon to talk about another game. I think we're on the pick up our stride again and try to get on.
I think we're on the right path.
I hope so. Well, thanks again, and thanks, of course, to everyone who is listening. If you want to catch up on previous episode, everything is on pieuvre.ca. You can also find us on Spotify, Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, and our host, the Balado Quebec. Before we go, I invite you to follow us on Twitter and Facebook. And the funny thing is, there's only a few of you are following us there, but you are many people listening to these episodes. Always interesting to see the statistics. So thank you once again for being here, and we'll talk to you next time.
All right, until next time.